Started. There we go. Evening, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for people to sign on. Had some technical difficulties, so thank you for your patience. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Cotto, and I'm the Director of Racial and Social Justice for YWCA Delaware. Our Let's Talk series is part of our 21-day equity challenge. So if you are not doing that, please go to our website and sign up, or maybe later I'll put a link in the thing. It's one of these wonderful women are talking. I am so excited about our panel tonight. This is Let's Talk Disability. Even if you didn't follow us this week and the topics that were shared, you'll catch up a little bit, and we might not talk every specific topic, but so tonight I have with me, I'm just going to real quick, Carlean Ponder, and she's with ARC, Dr. Sarah Curtis, and she's with University of Delaware, and LeTonya Wilson-Nalley is a parent advocate. And so we've got, I love to have people in the education, the community, all that kind of thing. So thank you guys in the audience for being here tonight. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and LeTonya, I'm actually going to kind of start with you. I shouldn't say many, some people might have read about you in the newspaper. That's how I found you. If you wouldn't mind, just share a little bit about yourself, kind of about your story and your son, and you know.
Definitely. Well, good evening, everybody, and I'm so glad to be here to talk. So I'm LeTonya Wilson-Nalley, and I have 4 kids altogether, but my second child, when he was about 2, he was his daycare teacher came to me. Daycare I've been going to for a very long time. His teacher came to me and said, you know, I have some worries about him, you know, maybe you can try this program. And the program that she was talking about was Child Development Watch. And Child Development Watch, they were able to do some testing on him just to see what was going on. Come to find out, he did have a speech delay. And within that, he was still having like behavior issues in school. He wasn't even 3 yet. But so 3, and then I think about like 3.5, 4 years old, he ended up getting put out of daycare, which is probably, you know, the story for a lot of us parents. So you got put out of daycare, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? It has to be something other than just a speech delay. What do I need to do? So I got some more testing done. At that time, he was getting speech at the daycare. So keep finding out, he ended up having sensory processing disorder as well. So within, that's another thing that's added on. He had started getting occupational therapy. Still kind of like no relief with anything, because he was still having so many behavior issues. It was affecting his learning. It was affecting him even continuing like just the speech and the occupational therapy. So I was just, you know, I didn't know what to do. And after that, you know, I kept trying to get him in different programs and so forth. That kind of didn't work either. So he started school during the pandemic. Which was that was his first year of kindergarten. That was homeschool. So, you know, you can imagine how that would have been. During that time, I also came upon an email. I don't even know how this email even got to me, but it was about the Delaware Disabilities Council. And they have a program called Partners in Policymaking. And, you know, they teach you about advocating for your loved ones or yourself who have a disability or a developmental disability. So I was in this program virtually, you know, learning about all of this information, making so many connections with other organizations, other resources. I'm like, this is great. So even after that, I'm able to even know the right words and things to say for, you know, to his teachers, to the admin at the school, to actually really get what I need for him, you know, to you know, even in the IEP meeting. And even with that, I was able to know what the right words were to say to his pediatrician to get him a faster appointment, to get him either, you know, seen and tested for either autism or anything else. Come to find out, he did have ADHD. He was diagnosed with that. And then after that, things have really, you know, kind of really just been taken off. So, you know, with that, I really thank the Partners in Policymaking or class, as well as Developmental Disabilities Council, which I am now a member of, and a part of a couple committees on the council. But with that, I was able to really learn what I needed to do for my son, as well as how to advocate for other kids. Even now, I have a 2-year-old that goes to the same daycare that my son was kicked out of. And the director and the teachers at the school, they always contact me, email or call me and say, hey, we have a parent who may be dealing with maybe the same thing your son was, do you mind talking to them? So I love doing that, for my son as well as for other kids. I think that's my 2-year-old screaming upstairs if anybody can hear it. Sorry.
I cannot hear it. I cannot hear it. Thank you so much. And it's interesting to me how people come to different careers in their life and personal experiences. And yeah, I reached out to the DDP. Was that yeah. And yeah, and I can't even remember who I spoke with, but I couldn't get anyone to answer me. And then I went down a little bit, I think, to the comms person, and it was, and then in the meantime, I had heard back from you, long story short. And so when I told him I was having you, he was like, oh, she's amazing. You don't need me. He was just like, you don't need me. So, so thank you so much, LeTonya, for sharing your story. And again, we have a couple different perspectives. LeTonya is the parent, and we have, I'm going to, Dr. Carlean Ponder. Well, are you a Dr. Carlean? I just added that on. So Carlean Ponder, who works for ARC, which I will have her share with us a little bit about what ARC does. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I will say Carlean is like famous. I had to find her. I couldn't believe we got someone outside of Delaware. It's hard, people.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you, Becca, for inviting me. I'm not doctor. I am a lawyer, though. Although I do mostly public policy work now, but I started in litigation. But yeah, so I work for the ARC of the United States. We represent people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, IDD for short. The ARC is a chapter-based organization. So we have, I think, just under 600 chapters across the United States. I know in Delaware, we have a state office. So typically our state offices tend to do more policy work. Whereas if you're in a state that has lots of chapters, you'll probably have an opportunity for more direct services and support from the chapters. So I joined the ARC after spending about 10 to 11 years with the Social Security Administration. In the disability section, I worked directly on disability cases as an attorney who reviewed the cases. And so I got to see, firsthand just how difficult it can be for applicants going through a large bureaucratic agency to get, vital support so that people can have access to food, access to housing, access to medical care, and that kind of thing. And so it was a good, sort of a good next step to join, this policy piece with the ARC. And I also have a background in doing criminal justice work. Criminal justice impacts people with disabilities, particularly Black people and Brown people with disabilities disproportionately. And so that was an important aspect of the work that I bring to the ARC as well. And, LeTonya, I'm so glad you are a parent advocate. It is so important to be an advocate for your child, especially your child with disabilities. And but it makes me a little bit sad to hear that the daycare kicked your child out. And unfortunately, it's that's kind of a familiar scenario, especially when we're talking about Black kids with what I call invisible disabilities. Something like autism would be an invisible disability. And so unfortunately, Black children tend to be labeled as difficult or oppositional or having behavior issues, but the actual work of getting that child checked out for a disability a lot of the times just doesn't happen. So anyway, I'm glad that you are doing that and being out there on the front lines for your child.
Thank you so much, Carlean. And Dr. Curtis, I'll call her Sarah. Sarah, share a little bit about what you do. You're a professor at the University of Delaware and kind of what space you're in.
Sure. I'll start like a little further back. I started my career out of undergrad as a direct service provider for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And within a year, I was managing a day program, a vocational day program. And like at a lot of non-for-profits, I wore a lot of hats. So I was in addition to managing the day program, I was the liaison for the Office of Inspector General to train staff, and then also identify and investigate abuse and neglect. I chaired our sexuality resource committee, so I taught sex ed and I coordinated sex education for our agency. I was on what's called like the technical support for behavior management committee, so helping anybody across the agency with managing challenging behavior. I was part of a group that started like our first social skills program for autistic children in this kind of more rural community in Illinois where I was working. And so when I decided to get my PhD, I kind of carried all of that with me. And so what I research now is, life skills across the lifespan, how we teach that well in both formal and informal educational contexts. So that's led to research on how to teach sex ed to people with autism and intellectual disabilities. And that's probably what I talk about, like public facing the most, but I also do research on things like the transition to adulthood, how to educate families and youth so they have the information they need, and things like family meal times, how to support families during meal times with teaching all those informal skills. So that's kind of me.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you for that. And while I'm the host of this today, I do want to just share a little bit. I have a brother who is intellectually disabled, and he lives in a group home, and he is 53 years old. And so when we go through some of this stuff, I have a lot of personal experience with it. My parents passed away a while ago. He's kind of been my responsibility since then. But he has had the benefit of living in the same group with the same three gentlemen since he was 19. And so they have moved 3 times, but all of them moved together, which is extremely rare if anybody knows about individuals who live in, and I am not his guardian. And we'll talk a little bit about that like the marriage and disability, it's kind of the same thing. And so if I were his guardian, I would be financially responsible for him. And that's a different space than Medicaid, right? And what that can offer him. So anyway, all right, so let's see, where should we start? Oh my goodness, so much. So I want to cover just a little bit. LeTonya, you had mentioned, your son got kicked out of daycare, and Carlean obviously pointed that out. It happens quite often. So would you mind both of you kind of talking about, because Carlean does a lot in the space of police and individuals with disability. And so, LeTonya, is that something that I shouldn't even ask? I'm sure it's something that concerns you. And maybe Carlean, a little bit about, what you do in that space. LeTonya, you can go first.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's definitely something that that I have, have thought about. And, and there is also I believe they're also, doing a program coming up soon about that, just to give, not just parents or caregivers information about that, but also, hearing from, police and, what they're doing, or where we can go to, so that, we can feel more comfortable, and our loved ones can feel more comfortable, if they ever come up against that stuff. So, just me, constantly being an advocate for myself as well as for others, just learning those different things. So I'm not all the way, nervous, but, just like I said, just learning and trying not to, just keep that hold on them, because I think that is where I feel right now. And probably other parents, it's like, okay, if they're just always with me, things will be fine. But, we can't do that. So, yeah.
And that's the reality of it. And I think Carlean can talk a little bit. I'm a huge advocate too for, I think I heard her mention in an interview that police are not skilled to do all the jobs, right?
Right.
And so as a parent advocate, maybe you before your son gets older, maybe we can change some of those. Go ahead, Carlean.
Yeah, so I got involved in this space, this intersection of disability and criminal justice work in 2018 when there was a Black man in my neighborhood who was killed by a police officer. His name was Robert White. And he had some mental disabilities, but he was capable of living on his own because he did live on his own. And he happened to be walking down the street one day when there was a police officer in the neighborhood for a different reason, but he saw Robert and, thought he was weird or different or who knows. Certainly knew he was Black. And so he stopped him. Robert responded, kind of out of frustration and also sort of out of his disability. He didn't want to be bothered. He was agitated. He wanted to be left alone. He asked the officer to do that. And, the police officer did not do that and kind of ratcheted things up and just didn't really make any effort at providing any sort of reasonable accommodations for a man who I think it was clear pretty early on had some form of disability. Things like giving him space, and also just recognizing that there really wasn't a reason to stop him in the first place. We do think it was racial profiling and also some profiling based on Robert's disability. The officer talked about him walking funny or being dressed a little bit differently or things like this. And so the officer ended up pursuing him. Robert hit him at one point. A fight ensued and the officer shot Robert and killed him. And so a grassroots organization sprang up around that that I helped form and lead for the first few years. And we've really been working on this topic of crisis response, which is the idea that there may be other people better suited to respond to people, particularly people with mental health disabilities, anybody who's having a mental health crisis, really, and that calling 911 and having an armed law enforcement officer show up to deal with a mental health crisis may not be the best thing. And it's certainly not a safe thing for people with disabilities, and particularly if you're Black with a disability. And I know for, parents of kids with IDD or even adults, adult kids with IDD, particularly anybody who's nonverbal or deaf, people who are deaf, there's just this fear and this anxiety about what could happen if they are approached by a police officer who lacks that instinct to provide accommodation.
Yeah, it's a legitimate fear though, right? I mean, the statistics tell us
Yeah.
that. And thank you for sharing that story with us. It usually, a lot of our work stems from, I think, in our life, from our personal experiences. How long ago was that?
So that was in 2018.
Okay.
And that was in the local community that I live in. But unfortunately, that's representative of what we see across the country when police are involved with anybody who's got a mental health disability or other form of disability.
Yeah, no, I want 100% there. I want to so is everybody familiar with 9-8? It's 988, right?
Yeah, 988.
So can you talk, how is that working? Can you tell me? I don't know if you know.
Sure. 988 is a brand new 3-digit national emergency hotline. And it is for people to call when they want to talk about a mental health stressor or emotional, health stressor. They can call and they can receive counseling right there on the phone. The organizers of 988 tell us that most of the issues are indeed resolved via phone call, but there are times when they may need to connect the person who's calling to services on the ground, which is where a lot of the work that I do, at the state level and at the federal level comes into play, because we don't really have, we certainly don't have a national system that provides services to go out and assist people who are in mental health distress. I mean, that for the most part, that's still tends to be police. We still tend to send out armed law enforcement. There are pockets of communities who are now funding alternatives, such as mobile health crisis teams, who can go out and intervene or provide services to people who are in crisis or needing some additional support. And so part of what I do at the ARC is advocate for federal funding
Mhm.
of these programs so that they can be on par with what we see with 911 and armed law enforcement. I mean,
Right.
a lot of police departments will actually tell you that a disproportionate number of the calls that they respond to involve mental health,
Mhm.
emotional issues, or dealing with people who are unhoused, for example. And so we think that there might be better ways to use police
Mhm.
than having them go out and do this sort of social work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just not a space that they're educated in. It takes a lot to understand and be able to see those signs. There should at least be a training in that space of, I mean, the other thing too, with individuals with disabilities, there's no set way that an individual behaves. So while some officers might think someone is on drugs or not answering them or whatever, they're all different, personal attributes that they have. So there's not like a one size fits
Yeah,
all.
and unfortunately, that tends to like ratchet up, the whole situation. If
Mhm.
the officer thinks he's being or he or she is being ignored,
Mhm.
or if it's a person who really gets triggered, like Robert did, by this whole, the uniform and the gun. Well, anybody would be triggered by that. I mean, the
Yeah.
gun, being
Right.
drawn on you. But I mean, with somebody who's already in a fragile mental state and agitated, I mean, that just ratchets things up. Robert walked away or attempted to walk away. And there are a lot of people with certain forms of, particularly IDD, who would attempt to walk away. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with a police officer, walking away can be seen as, I don't know, an act of aggression or, something
Yeah.
that sort of triggers, unfortunately, a physical response.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a whole different, let's talk.
Mhm.
So Sarah, let's talk a little bit about, this wasn't actually in our equity challenge, but we were talking about this before we got on. So let's talk a little bit about this for the audience and, sexual education and instruction. And for those of you that don't know, Delaware's Planned Parenthood is only one of 2 states, Oregon is the other, that actually does individual one-on-one counseling with individuals with disabilities about sexual education. So.
Yeah, it's actually, I think, a nice, I don't know, nice segues to exactly the world, but there's a lot of intersections between I think criminal and social justice and sexual and human rights justice for people with disabilities. So you have this kind of dual sides of people with disabilities not being adequately protected by police when it comes to victimization around sexual violence, but then also people with disabilities having like normative sexual behavior perceived in really problematic ways, and that can cause it to become something that could be either normative or maybe a mistake about like social norms become criminalized. So you have this like 2 sides of where in the domain of sexuality, where I think that's an important area for advocacy, both within with police agencies, but also with thinking about how we need to structure systems to utilize, especially on like the abuse side, using administrative tools to be able to increase investigations. So administrative tools would be like Child Protective Services or Title IX for folks who are in like University of Delaware. We have a program for adults with intellectual disabilities to be college students at UD, so Title IX would cover them, so thinking about all of that whole system in terms of making sure that people have more adequate, I don't know if protection is the right word, but definitely like ways to have that abuse acknowledged and investigated, and some safety things put into place.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Carlean used a term, and it's probably a common term in the industry, but and I think that's what you're getting at is reasonable accommodations,
Mhm.
right? Like, and that comes to equity, right, versus equality is we don't all need the same things to be successful, and we have to kind of understand. So we learned about, an individual with disability is 3 times more likely to suffer from sexual assault. And I will just share that my brother was a victim of a sexual assault because there's continued space in the housing and individuals that take care of them. And it's hard, although my brother's verbal, that's not a topic that he talks about or was ever educated on. So it took a while for the staff to kind of, get to the bottom of that. And then there's the question of, how he can explain that versus how, the perpetrator could, right? So it's definitely different. So I think it would probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, harder to prosecute in those situations.
Yeah, there's it's definitely not prosecuted. I mean, we know that like sexual assault isn't prosecuted as much as it could be, right? But it's definitely very difficult. So in some states like Delaware, they have a law where having an intellectual disability can affect your ability to give consent. So if there is, so what that does is it lowers the burden of proof, right? So instead of having to prove that the assault was forced, you can just have to prove that that there was the presence, and then you can use that clause of having an intellectual disability to raise that to the caliber of a sexual assault.
Do you know and how long that's been a law?
I don't know how long it's been a law
Okay.
in Delaware, but there's been at least, because Sanford put out a report of all these laws from state to state and all the cases that have been tried. And that was published in, I want to say 2018. And they had at least one court case that had tried in Delaware to use that that part of the law. So it's been at least since then. But as you brought up, like there's the education piece too. So like, what I talk to families, even, families with young children about is like, if you're not setting up that communication about what healthy sexuality looks like from a young age, then there's not going to be that ability to disclose when things are unhealthy or unsafe. I would say the other thing that this is if my soapbox is sometimes we can talk about people with disabilities as being vulnerable, but I think we should really shift that framing to thinking about the systems that are vulnerable, right? That create these vulnerabilities, the systems within our adult service system, the system like our school system, even like the systems in our society, these laws that make it so people aren't being protected equally. So these are, I think, coalesce to get that higher rate that you talked about. That's not a one person's vulnerability, right? That's a systemic issue. So kind of shifting that, because otherwise it does, I think if we're not talking about all the weaknesses in our system, then we're not also like putting things in place to fix them. So I'll just toss out one example, right? So we've talked a little bit about guardianship. Delaware has a really comprehensive guardianship law. So that means that if you experience a sexual assault as a person with disability, your guardian could actually prevent you from receiving rape crisis services. They could prevent you from receiving counseling, right? And so that's a huge problem, right, in the system when we don't have, so if you have these kind of guardianship laws, you need specific legislation that says like, okay, here we need to have the guardians, like a person with a disability, even if they have a guardian, has the right to receive counseling or rape crisis services.
Wow. That's do you know, is there anybody working on that?
I don't know if there's anybody working on that in Delaware. There is like sample legislation of what that looks like, and other states have passed it.
Okay, all right, great. Maybe I'll connect with you after.
Yeah,
I'm always about advocacy for people. LeTonya,
I wanted
Please.
to add something to that. So there was one of the council members, we had a council meeting today for the Advocacy and Outreach Committee. And that was one of the questions, but they're about to have a fireside chat. And the new acting director for DSSS, they're going to be on there, Jody Roberts, and they're looking for questions of, what are some services? I wrote it down. What are some services, or what are gaps in the services that can help? And, just what you mentioned there, I think that would be great, like getting that legislative, put in there of something of, what if this does happen, so, that they can still get the services, because what if their guardian of, is that person, so that is something I'm definitely going to bring back to the council. That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'd be happy, we can connect, and I can send you like some, like I said, I know at least one state who has passed this kind of legislation, so. Mhm.
That's what I love about this stuff, connecting. LeTonya, what I actually kind of was going to ask was, Sarah talked a little bit about the education portion, and it's amazing that you found the help that you did. And I love now that you are not just an advocate for your son, but you're an advocate for parents and connecting them to these resources. So is this your job now?
I don't even know anymore what my job is. I'm just, maybe one day. And I've always said that even when I got started, sometimes, trying to work with your child and trying to figure out, okay, what is going on? It really actually molds you, not just your child. It molds you into probably, your purpose and what you're actually probably supposed to be doing. So it might be my job.
It might be. Yeah. Because I'm thinking that there are probably, and I shouldn't even say I'm thinking, I know there are parents that never are able to kind of counter that. In one of the microaggression courses that we teach, I show a video, and in the video, and I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, it was a study of teachers, and they're watching a white boy, a black boy, a white girl, and a black girl, and the teachers are asked to find the child with the bad behavior. Okay. And so 42% of the teachers selected the black boy with the bad behavior, but ironically, there was no bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said the majority of the teachers' eyes followed the black student. And I think that was what Carlean said, what happened to your son is just, par for the course.
Yeah, and it's also something I didn't even mention is that it really, just being able to know how to advocate for my child. It has really brought me closer with the admin at the school, the teachers. They know I'm always there, so they can call and ask me about anything. Even if they want to know, they even asked me, the teachers at the school, it's a public school, hey, what did you do, Miss Wilson? So that, maybe it's another child in the school that they're trying to help, because even, they may not have all the answers as well. So it really does touch me to be able to do that, because I don't want them to, judge someone based off of their color or anything like that. Even just their disability of, I just want them to have the facts. I want individuals to have the facts and, not just judge anyone, and if they need resources, then they can come to me.
Well, that's good to know. I'll be sure to email all your personal contact information out. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You can find her. I think, I don't even remember. You have an email though, is it a parent advocacy email or something?
Yeah, it's parents for parents, DE@gmail.com.
Right.
And when I was in the partners and policy making class, we had to come up with a project, kind of like a company or organization. So that was that's the email I started. So yeah,
so is it for FO?
This is the number 4 parents, parents, DE@gmail.com.
Parents for DE. Wait, parents for.
I'm sorry. Parents, the number 4 parents, DE@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Parents for parents at DE. Awesome. All right. Thank you for that. Yeah. So if there's anyone watching or knows anyone, because I think I really know that that's a struggle that we have in the school system. I have a friend with child with disabilities, and it's the same thing. You've got the IEP, and then there are some teachers that are so very educated in this space, right? Like they know they're advocates themselves, and then there are some teachers just they haven't had enough training or they're not familiar, but it's good that they realize that, and that's the best thing is like, okay, where can I get this student the help that they need to be able to make sure they're successful? Carlean, talk a little bit about your days as a lawyer and what you did, because you were a lawyer for individuals with disabilities, right?
Well, I did mostly civil rights law, so I just did lots of different things. But it's interesting because I mean I did some housing cases, I did some voting rights cases, some criminal cases. But it's interesting because now at my job at the ARC, all of that stuff is in my portfolio: voting rights and housing and all these other issues. Because guess what? People with disabilities are involved with every aspect of society. And so, but now now I do it from this more inclusive perspective, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I can tell that you are really passionate about your job. Voting rights, it's interesting that you brought that up. So in our state, there is a small group of us that have stemmed from we have a Delaware voting group that, advocacy group. And then there's a portion of us that have just started an advocacy group for individuals with disabilities, because although Delaware's election statement is that there's accommodations at every site, the reality is there's not. Of course, right? So it states that there is, but it's either sometimes the entrance is at the other side, or there's just not, we just don't have reasonable accommodations for people. And I'll say that something in the last 2 years, when you start to work in the social justice space, you see the intersectionality of all these different isms, right?
Exactly.
And so, you just add a couple on and there we are. So we're doing our thing on housing next week, but touch a little bit on, how that we have a home life shelter, YW does, for those that don't know. And so we sometimes that we get that, like, if people are on disability.
Yeah.
So
yeah, housing for people with disability is probably one of the top 2 or 3 struggles, right up there with like healthcare and getting Social Security, because there's not a lot of accessible housing in the country. I think only 5% of the housing stock is considered accessible. And so really there, you're even talking about like physical, accessibility. So having entrances that are wide enough to accommodate a wheelchair, for example. But there could be people with other forms of disabilities where they don't need a wheelchair, but they can't do stairs. So you've got to have a unit, on the first floor available. Or, you could have people with sensory disabilities or sensitivities, which means, the lighting or noise and smoke, even cigarette smoking and other forms of smoking. All those kinds of things can really make it difficult in terms of finding accessible housing. Affordability, of course, is another big barrier, because for people who are on SSI, supplemental security income, most rental markets are more expensive than somebody's monthly SSI payments. And especially if you have to use your SSI payments to budget for other things like paying bills or buying food or clothing. So it generally means that that combination of affordability and accessible housing is out of reach from much of the population. And for people who want to live independently, maybe they don't want to live in a group home or with family members. It makes it that much harder, especially if they don't come from, families who can help them, who can provide, a rental subsidy for them. It becomes very hard to become an independent person out there in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely that barrier there. Okay, so on January 13th of 2022, I don't know if this has gone anywhere, but I don't think so, because it was in our education about the 21-day equity challenge. So it looks like California Congressman Panetta introduced the Marriage Equality Act for disabled adults. I don't know, Sarah or Carlean, if one of you guys want to touch on that, if you know what that is, or both of you, or, you know, because I don't think people realize one, what it does, and two, kind of the motivation behind it, right?
No, so I honestly would need to take a look and see what the bill does. I don't, is it like marriage equality for SSI purposes? And it's
Yeah,
uh-huh.
that's what it is. So there's like a marriage penalty with SSI.
Yeah.
So you probably know the details of that better, Kelly.
Right. So if you are a married person and you live with somebody else who is receiving SSI, the second person's SSI payments will be reduced because you're considered, you know, a unit. And again, that is a penalty because SSI, you know, monthly payments aren't generally enough to cover basic necessities. And so why penalize people because they are married and both have disabilities that qualify for SSI? And as an attorney who worked for the Social Security Administration, I can tell you that most applications are rejected. So, you know, you know, it's a very stringent process to even qualify for SSI to begin with. So you really are talking about people who are not capable of going out into the workforce, at least full time.
And isn't it also like if a person with disability is married somebody without a disability, it could make the person with a disability's SSI benefits also go away?
Yes, because of the household income. Yeah, so because SSI is dependent upon your economic status, and it's a very low threshold. So, you know, for example, I think you can't, and I could be wrong, but I think you can't have more than $2,000 in savings. You know, that's not much money. And it's, you know, we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouths when we want people to be able to afford things like, you know, co-pays to the doctor's office or emergency room visits, and, you know, have their car breaking down, and we want you to be able to afford these things. But at the same time, we're saying, oh, well, you can't have more than $2,000 in savings.
Right. That's, I mean, it's good that we have that, but what's interesting is how old it is on the books. And we don't need to dive deep into this, but the first day of the Racial Equity Challenge, the topic was eugenics. And, you know, the idea behind this bill originally is procreation, right? Like not encouraging procreation among individuals with disabilities, which would be marriage, you know, kind of that. And it all kind of bounces back to, I mean, I think we have come a long way. When my brother was very young, my mom was always petrified that he would be put in Stokely, which does not exist anymore. It's an institution. So I think we've come a long way, but like anything, there's such a long way to go. And I think we touched on, you know, we've got sexuality, we've got criminalization, you know, we've got education, and there's all these spaces that we have these advocates in, but people aren't aware, I don't think, of everything that's out there. Do you guys have any questions for each other? I just like to throw that out there. You don't have to.
I had a question for LeTonya, because I've actually had like 2 people email me about this daycare issue lately, about like, how can we get daycares to be equipped to support children with disabilities? Because, you know, even if you qualify for birth to 3, a lot of times that's only half day and they really need full day. And other states do it, right? Other states, some are able to have it just be part of their program. So I wonder just what you know of that's happening in that area, because I think it's a huge need.
Yeah, definitely. And I've also talked about that, and I'm not sure exactly what is going on, but that is something that, you know, I am also talking to the council about to see, you know, what is it that we can do? How can, you know, we can, you know, shed some light on this. And, you know, even talking to some of the daycare directors, they speak about how they want the same thing. They want their teachers to have more training, you know, on certain things so that they can be more equipped to work with children with developmental disabilities or disabilities. And I think it's coming from the state. Even, like I said, one of them actually asked, it's kind of like rooting, like, hey, this is what we need, going to the state, going, to those meetings to request it. And I think it's just not the funding put in. So I think, I think, for right now, we just got to keep putting a good fight in, and really see. I think that even over the course of time, even daycares are also, kind of even trying to figure it out, because even the daycare that my child went to and my other child is still going to, they have put some things in place, some more things in place than they did before when my son was there and got kicked out. So, it's kind of just bringing that awareness to it. But I wish I had like a whole complete answer or a whole list of, hey, these are the daycares that, are great. Even a fellow member in the Partners in Policymaking class, she was like, I'm going to start a daycare that, that can accept any child, whether they have a disability or not. So yeah, just keep putting that good fight in. But also, if you do have any, those individuals that came to you, just continue to let them know, that, just the different like resources that are out there for them, because I know that really does help. And it really does, even though there's issues that are going on at the daycare, it really does help that, there's other resources that they can kind of go to. And hopefully they can, start making those programs that are, that the children can go to a little longer, because cutting your day short at 12 o'clock as parents, it just doesn't make sense to be able to provide a living and also take care of your children. It just doesn't make sense for them to stop it there. So I do understand that. That was a struggle for me. I had a lot of crying days about that too. Yeah.
Maybe we could come up with a grading system for daycares in this particular space.
Yeah.
And, make that be part of, purchase of care funding or something like that. Daycares that qualify and get a certain grade, get additional purchase of care. I mean, there is always a solution. Sometimes you have to think outside the box about what that is. I mean, daycare workers, childcare workers make very little money at all. So, I mean, that's part of the issue.
The ECAP program, they're in school until 3, and I do know that they're at PS. They're in school until 3, and they do have after school care as well. And then they have those therapists in the schools.
What's ECAP? Sorry, what does ECAP stand for?
ECAP is early childhood assistance program. So it's not just children with disabilities that go to that school, it's all types of children. But with that, they also can, when I first when they were giving me like resources of different childcare areas or childcare places to go to, they were one of them, and they actually start at 3 years old. So yeah, that is what I have found that is good. And like I said, they're from 9 to 3, and then they do have there are daycares that will come pick your child up at the end. Not a lot of daycares at the moment. Hopefully there could be more, but there are some that will come pick your child up if you need that extra care after 3 p.m.
Yeah, wow. That's good. I mean, my girlfriend, that happened for her because her kid had needed medical needs, her child. So nurses and kids did that for her, but not, if it's just, I shouldn't say if it's just, but when you have mental, individual disabilities, it's different. It's a different space than, so it's good that they're coming out with some sort of services, and we're starting to kind of address this issue on a whole as a community. Sorry, Sarah, did you have any other questions? I just no, that was your question. Okay, great. I am going to open it up in a couple minutes to the audience, but I would love for, Carlean, could you tell me what you're working on right now? Not like literally this second, but I know.
Oh yeah, I mean, today the ARC just hosted a virtual conference because we have something called Disability Policy Seminar, and so we send advocates to Capitol Hill to go and talk about a lot of the issues that we're talking about here, education issues, the crisis response issue, the housing, and actually Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester from Delaware was one of our speakers today. And so, you know, she had a career in disability rights in Delaware. So I would certainly encourage you all to speak with her, particularly around the issues around daycare and you know, that 12 p.m. you know, pickup time, which doesn't seem very helpful to many people, because she's a real advocate and she gets it, because she was on the, you know, she was on the inside before she became a member of Congress. So
She is amazing. She's done everything, I swear. Yeah, I was going to say maybe LeTonya can join you in DC sometime.
yes, we would love, actually, we would love that. Yeah.
I'm giving LeTonya more to do. You know, she has 4 children, but yeah, just go to DC for the day. But that's, you know, when we talk about advocacy, that's one of the things that is most important, is when people making the policies and laws hear from individual experiences. I mean, as an organization, we go on and we kind of talk about overall what our clients kind of their experiences are. And it not that it doesn't matter, but if we can get a client or someone's individually going through that experience to share, it's more poignant, it's more, you know, kind of heartfelt. All right, so if there are any people in the audience that have questions, you guys can put them in the either way, Q&A or chat. I don't think I turned either one off, but you know, I have some hardcore people here in the space. And so before we go, actually, I'm going to ask you guys, I think, Carlean, you talked a little bit about the movement to add social workers. Is there anything in your spaces that people can help you move the needle?
Yes, I mean, most of this work needs to be done at the local levels. So, I mean, it's really up to people who care about this issue to go and make sure that their cities and their counties and their state legislatures are saying, wait a minute, we need to make sure that our budget funds alternatives to, you know, 911 and armed law enforcement to go out and interact with people in a mental health crisis situation. I mean, so we need advocacy, and that has to come from the people. And so we've got to be able to, you know, raise a lot of noise about this and say, no, we actually demand the funding. We want to see it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry, is there something in the space that people can help support the efforts? You know, you did your thesis on kind of sexual assault in the disability community, I think, and I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there things that people in the community can do? Are there things that we could kind of look out for or advocate for?
Yeah, so I think some of that depends on like who you are and where you are kind of coming to this from. So like, I would say if like you're a parent, I think one of the really, like, you have one of the places to start is just starting to have these conversations at home, because and not just about like scary things, but just about like sexual development and what to expect, and what these, you know, what body parts are and what these feelings are, because, you know, I sometimes talk about that the camouflage that perpetrators hide behind is our silence about sexuality, right? So by ripping away that silence, like that is, you're giving them less places to hide. So, you know, but if you're, you know, a parent, or not a parent, sorry, but a teacher or a school administrator, you know, thinking about like, are you actually providing the state required consent and sex ed, because not all schools do, and if you, even if you're doing it, are you doing it so that it is accessible to all your students?
Mm-hmm.
So I partnered with Children and Family First, because they do a lot of sex ed throughout Newcastle County, to help support, to figure out if we can make the training that they're already coming into schools, they're already contracted to do, make it more accessible. with the approved content that the schools have already kind of selected. So that was awesome. Like, they were so amazing to work with.
That's
But
great.
they don't go into every single school, and even they don't necessarily go into every single classroom in every single school. So especially classrooms that are, what might be called self-contained classrooms, they're not always going to those. So these are the kind, I guess, like, these are the different entry points depending on who you are. And I could talk maybe more specifically depending if people have questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's education, I think, is a lot. And I like the way that you said that kind of peels away the spaces when individuals have that verbiage to say, this is this, touch this, you know what I mean? Like, this happened, and to teach children at a young age. It's funny you said, are they following the law? And the thing about the law for that is that there's no repercussions to not, like, Delaware, the state of Delaware passes legislation to require schools to do certain things, but there's no accountability if they don't do it. So even though we just passed our history, Black history education, and schools are supposed to be implementing it, there's no way to hold schools accountable if they choose to not do it. And it's because we have 19 school districts and, yada, yada, yada. But, and LeTonya, I think you probably told us, but how can people get involved? And we have a couple questions that we'll get to. So,
Oh, definitely. How people can get involved is, I would say, start with, just the Parent Information Center. They have a lot of information, a lot of resources that they also pass around. I will also even say, if you are someone who has a disability or developmental disability, or you are caring for a child or a loved one that does, also get involved with the Delaware Disability Council, because they do have that Partners in Policymaking Advocacy program that is actually going on right now for this year. They have it each year that you can be a part of, just to learn a little bit more, connect with different other individuals who have loved ones or have a disability themselves, to learn how to be an advocate for others or yourself. It really expands the community as far as what you're doing or what you want to learn, so that you can provide more, because, we speak with different people from the state, and they provide us with information, and they always say, if you ever have any questions, reach out. So I would definitely say start there, because you can really get a lot of other connections just from starting there.
yeah, great. So what I will do for folks in the audience is I will ask people to give me like some links to things, our panelists today, and we'll send out a little survey. We'll ask you to go ahead and if you guys don't mind, LeTonya, you can send me some of those resources. And so Sandra from California, this is interesting. NAMI has a program for training police in San Francisco and sending mental health professionals on site. And she says this does not happen in Delaware. It does not. And I'm sorry the chat was disabled. I will fix that for the next one. And Sol, he has a daughter, she has a daughter with Down syndrome. She's struggling with her behavior at school. However, at home, she's not. As a working parent, it's tough to be more present. I need help in talking about the topic that have been mentioned with being nonverbal, sex drive, and aggression. Okay, so I think, Sarah, are there resources, or is Planned Parenthood the kind of?
Yeah, so Planned Parenthood can provide, a certain number of sessions of one-on-one education. I have a website called asdsexed.org, where I put any information I develop or find. So it has, information for parents and also professionals. So there might be some things on there that you can, that you might be able to use. If you're in New York, there's a part of the library that's housed within Willard Hall Education Building, called the ERC, the Educational Resource Center, and they have curriculum that anybody in the community can check out that is specifically adapted for intellectual disabilities. So sex ed curriculum, sorry, that is specifically adapted for people with disabilities. So I worked with them to purchase some of those. And then the other thing that I've been doing, kind of getting into more recently, is thinking about how to advocate through a first better sex education through IEP meetings. So I have like a guide on like how to bring sex ed up at your IEP meeting. And then a parent recently asked me, like, could you give me like some language that what it might look like? And so I have some like sample language that if you email me, I haven't got it up on the website yet, so you'd have to email me, right? And I could share it with you. So that's some of this. So, you know, so those are some of the things that I personally can attest to that question. And I've also just like, you know, I'll just meet with families too, to kind of like brainstorm and talk. I'm happy to do that. I'm not right now in a position where I can really like provide direct service, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody more kind of in depth about your specific child or family, kind of where they're at.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And so if they go to the website though, can they email you from there?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So you can send me the website. So if there's other information and they want to reach out and talk, then that's a way for them to get a hold of you. Awesome. Another question, maybe. Let's see, I disconnected. Oh, he put his or hers, sorry. So so put their email in the chat. And can you see that? Okay, so I'll let you, but I also will email that out to you so you have that information. There was an incident, Carlean, that happened actually in Delaware. I don't even know how many years ago. And a man was shot and he was in a wheelchair, and it became, we don't have laws in Delaware right now. We still have what's called the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. And we are only one of now 13 because Maryland repealed theirs. We are only one of 13 states that still has this bill. And the bill, what it does, it's not allow any kind of basically investigative information available to the public, no misconduct records, no anything. And so because of labor, it's really hard for our attorney general to ever hold anyone responsible. But you have to think that there's one man in a wheelchair and several police officers, and how threatened could they be? And so that is, and yes, it was a Black man. Yeah. And that is a case his family's still been, you know, kind of trying to advocate for. And the attorney general has basically said, I've done all I can. I mean, and it's the laws, you know, it's the laws that are there that are unfortunate that people have. So, all right. Let me just click that off here. All right, guys. Well, I'm not going to keep you too long. Thank you all so much for this conversation. And I know we kind of had a couple different topics, and I appreciate all of you. And I really appreciate the work that you do, no matter the reason, whether it's personal struggle or if it's just a passion. There's a lot to be done. So I know my daughter is actually a direct service provider. Sarah, so she does what you used to do, and she loves her job, She had, I will say, had a rough time during COVID because a lot of them lived in institutions, and you know, we talked about the nursing homes, but I don't think we have generally as a society talked about what happened in those institutions, because she, in the first like 2 months, she lost 6 people, and that's a lot when you look at her caseload. And so I think often this population is really kind of disregarded. And I'll be the first to say, despite the fact that I have a brother, when I do my work, it's not forefront of my mind sometimes, because it's not my personal experience. I think we all do that. So hopefully everybody that joined us tonight, if it wasn't for personal experience, you learned a lot. And thank you very much. I will email you a survey, and I will give you the resources that our wonderful panelists did. And I would love for you guys to just kind of close out a little bit, and you know, if you don't have much to say, but just kind of say goodbye. Good night.
Thank you. I mean, it was great to be on this panel. I'm really glad that disability was part of your racial justice challenge.
Yes, thank you. I was so glad to be here tonight, to not give my story and, you know, some different resources and things I've done, but also to gain some information as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. And
oh, you're
to meet you all.
I know, right, Amy? No, thank you again all for being here, and I love that you just come all from different spaces, and keep up the work.
Thank you.
Because our statement is justice until justice. Yeah. So,
justice until justice.
No,
That's still good. Justice.
No. until justice just is.
Just,
Ah,
yeah.
Yeah, so that's our new term for this challenge. So
Nice.
it's a long way to go. Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you
Bye.
for joining us.